and Vaishali Chopra from Yara International. And I think one of the biggest learnings from the last session was that though we are riding the headwinds, there may be some tailwinds, especially as we look at the geopolitical story that is going to impact a lot of our economic transition, the high debts riding on different countries, and at the same time, our own issues of not leaving anyone behind. So how is this growth really going to trickle to development and other sectors so that we can make it sustainable? So kindly be seated, and I'm going to hand over to Rahul to take this forward.
Welcome to the second session. I think, like just Vinita said, the first session was extremely interesting with lots of different perspectives, talking about where we are headed to. There's likely to be some degree of overlap in what we are going to discuss and what was discussed in the first session, but I think the important differentiation here is that we'll be hearing two editors. And editors do tend to have a different perspective on issues compared to CEOs. CEOs, of course, look at their business. Editors also look at their business, but they definitely have a different view and perspective on where things stand, because I think it's largely because they are not dealing with just one business, they're dealing with the world at large. So great to have you, AKB and Raj. The interesting thing is that the two gentlemen were together in PAFI back in 2015. So it's taken a very long time to bring them together, but I'm sure that it'll be really interesting to hear their viewpoint on where we are and what the journey is going to be like. What are the kind of challenges? Like I said, some of it was discussed, but a different perspective here. I mean, I had the honor of actually being part of AKB's team 30 years ago in Economic Times. So, economic guru, so much to learn. Raj, of course, I've followed very closely. We never had the opportunity to work together, but we have stayed in touch, and it's been fascinating to read what he has been writing in India Today, and before that in Tribune, and prior to that again in India Today. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I thought it'll be good to sort of kind of break it up a bit. In the sense, focus, Raj, more on politics and socio-politics with you, and more on economy and socio-economy with you. AKB has just written a book, if I'm not mistaken. He's always been known as the guy who knew all the finance ministers. So and I think he's done a wonderful job in bringing together his own personal experiences, writing about that. I just wanted to set the stage. Some of it's already been set in the previous session, but I think India is definitely at an inflection point. We are, I think Ashish mentioned in the previous session, have some sort of arrived. We are definitely a positive story than what we were. There remain challenges, and we all know about those challenges as people who deal in policy or the companies that we work with. We face challenges every day. We face uncertainties that can impact the business, but there is a lot more that impacts business. I remember a conversation with the head of a very large company on a flight last year. We just got talking from Delhi to Mumbai, and one of the things that he came up with, he said it's very worrying to see a few things that can impact business, and one is definitely what's happening in terms of politics. Obviously, he remains unnamed, but his concern was that we need to really address those issues. He was concerned about the socio-economic impact of what's happening in the country and what's happening globally. I think one of the main issues that we face also is global uncertainty. We are in the middle of, we got into the middle of a war in Europe. We are now in the middle of a war in the Middle East. Not war. I don't think it's a war, because I don't think another country is being attacked. But There is definitely a possibility of a third flare-up in Asia when you look at Taiwan and China. All these things come together and impact the way we look at the world, the way India has to operate, the way India has to work to make sure that we continue to succeed in the manner that we have set out. So I want to keep it flexible. I think focus more on questions, some from me and some from the audience. We have some time. The previous session got a bit delayed, but I think, yeah. So, Raj, can I invite you to make the opening comments?
Well, thank you, Rahul, and good to be back. You had mentioned 2015. I think I had a lot more hair and possibly wiser. Losing hair might make me less sort of intelligent. And I see AKB. Maybe it's a thing with editors that we lose our hairs frequently. Too much to handle. But yeah, I think the other hazard of being there is that, as you mentioned, we're in uncertain times. We might be in a metaverse, not to use the FB, Facebook new corporate name, but we are in many microverses. And as you've seen, and as you mentioned some of them, apart from the fact that you've got wars, one in Ukraine, another about to begin in Middle East, or already begun in some senses, you have the problem of COVID and the pandemic that looms, continues to loom because we never know when the next one is going to strike. You've also got climate change as a major crisis. So any predictions, trying to say what we will look at 2030 is going to be, our best laid plans will not be mice and men that will disrupt it, probably men, but certainly completely black swans, as we call them, unprecedented events that could change the way we look at things. So anything moving forward is always hazardous when you look at things. But let's have a look at what some of the issues, political you had talked about. So politically, the aim that Mr. Modi has talked about is really looking ahead and saying, okay, what will India be at 2047? So he calls that we should, and sets the goal, which is being a developed nation at that point. So we got together in India Today magazine and said, okay, what does this mean? I mean, when you say 2047, developed nation, let's look at it and let's see how we can boil it down to set goals, set missions, and what is it that we really need to look at as a nation. So among the things that came up was, first, of course, defining, when you say, okay, 2030, we are going to be the third largest economy, overtaking Japan. What does that mean? I mean, to the ordinary citizen, it's seen like a credit. But when you look down and get into the definition of a developed country, and I'm sure AKB can add to that, what is the criteria that people look at? Is it the infrastructure that you provide? Is it the kind of standard of living that you do? What is it that defines a developed country? What is that aim that we're looking at? Is there value systems that we look at as a democracy, as a thing? So I think it's very important to get those facts. Even when you talk politics, we only look at all the arguments and debates. But what is it, when you finally boil it down, what does that add up to? And if you look at some of the criteria, one of them is per capita income. Okay, so if you take a look at India's per capita income at the moment, it's around $2,000. That's about 2 lakhs or so, or depending on how the exchange fluctuates. And if you look at China, I think that's about 10 times more, or a little less, sorry, around 16,000 or so is what they say. But if you look at what is classified as a developed country, and the per capita income that they talk about is around $20,000 and above per capita income. Where does India stand in that, even when we land up? Even China, which has done remarkably well, is not considered a developed country. They will achieve that only when they cross this 20,000, which they haven't as yet. So you are, in some senses, defining that, is putting it down to people and how we should transform ourselves. The second point on that is, okay, so where do we look at? Which are the areas that, and we can discuss this, I don't want to make it a long sort of intro to it. But yeah, if you take, it's all not rocket science, right? You want to look at road, so you say, okay, where should we be in our roads? And what is the condition of our roads? So one template could be, what is the average speed that, say, a truck driver goes in the US, across the US? How many kilometers does he do per day? And what have we in India, if you really want to build up infrastructure? So there, if you look at statistics, we do about 350 kilometers a day on a truck driver in India. Whereas the US, the lowest average is 700 kilometers. So you already have a benchmark as to say, how do we get there from here? And what is it that we need to do in the next 5 years if we are spending, and this is not to reflect on Mr. Gadkari. I think he's doing a marvelous job. I've been to Haridwar recently and I did it in about 2.5 hours, which would normally take me 5 hours. So we are progressing, but really when it comes to some of these movements, or you take a look at rail, since we're looking at transport. Our fastest train right now is about 160 kilometers. Vande Bharat, I think, is what is being talked about. Right, but if you look at Shinkansen, it's about 350 kilometers per hour. So we are making a beginning. I think the first one is going to happen between Mumbai and Ahmedabad. And I think that will cut the average time of 500, 600 kilometers. We'll cut it from 5 hours to about 2 hours. So how many more Shinkansens do we need to put in? Is that the priority? What can we do to it? Take a look at another area, and I'll stop then let AKB come into this, is communications. Here again, we are into the 5G era much before the others. Great, great achievement in some senses because we've leapfrogged. If you look at the average cost of our GB, 1 GB, it is probably the lowest. The US charges 33 times more. So we are technologically enabled, but the next leap, where do we get from there? So, I mean, 6G is coming. How do we leverage that? Not because we need to be in the 6G areas, but how can 6G transform and revolutionize the country? And what are those things that we require to get to 6G? Whether it is building your own infrastructure, which I think this current government has done, whether it is collaborating with others, which we now see, which is happening in the US with the critical technologies agreement that we signed. Where do we get to that? We've seen the kind of shortages semiconductor chips have caused. What is the kind of leadership can we provide? So just to sum up, I think we're looking at leadership in certain areas. And if you really boil down, there may be about 10 sectors. Like I said, it's not rocket science. You can talk of transport, communications, education, health. You just bring down that and see where your priorities lie at 2030 and what are we doing to achieve that. I think that's the starting point for us to boil down and see. We can talk of politics. Are our politicians really focusing on that? I think that's very critical in terms of how we define some of the issues that were there. So when we're looking at technology, what would I like? I mean, I think one of the big things that we want is, how do you revolutionize your land records? Each of us have property of some sort, and we try it, not in urban areas, I'm talking of the vast areas of villages. What is it that technology can do to revolutionize so that you don't have the kind of corruption that you have? Right now, you have to go right down to get even a bit of kata or whatever it is that is at that lower level. How can the satellite technology define all this, give you things, bring you maps, as we did with COVID? We have demonstrated that we can build connectivity and track people and do things. How do we transform that? So I think some of these points that when we look at, whether we are getting to transport, when you look at education, where are we at stem cells, where are we, STEM education, where are we with, in terms of skill development, how much do we need to do? I think these are the pragmatic issues that we looked at. We can add a lot more to this and maybe AKB can come. But I'd just like to end with one little thing that we look at is what are the values that define this nation? I think that's very, very critical. You don't get to any place in your personal life or with your family or anyone unless you have a certain value system. And I think that is very, very important as we get going with whatever we're doing. We are seeing a major war happening, and what are the value systems Israel and Hamas has, and what are the goals that they're achieving? Where do we stand on that? Very important to look at in terms of where do we stand in democracy, free speech, entrepreneurship. Are those things being restricted? Are we being freed? All this will, I think, have a bearing, and we can discuss a lot more of that.
Very good morning to everybody. Thanks, Raj. Thanks, Rahul. Thanks, Vinita. The subject that I would speak on has been covered to a great extent by Raj. What I would do is, by way of amplification or addition, I will make practically two main points. And I was looking at the subject, which is securing India's road to growth, and that beautiful note that you have prepared here, ends with this sentence: how must India prepare to face global and local challenges as we move towards emerging as the third largest economy? Now, I will just segment my brief thoughts, preliminary thoughts, in two categories. One is the global challenges, one is the local challenges. Now, when you look at the economy in terms of the global challenges, there's no doubt and that the world, as Larry Summers recently said, is on fire. The world is also in a flux. So I think there is no doubt that the global situation is not very certain. We do not know what happens tomorrow, how things shape up. So we need to be wary, and our growth aspirations of our becoming a developed country by 2047 will have to be defined in many ways by what is happening to the world, because we don't exist on our own in isolation. Having said that, let me also add that probably economically, India has never been so stable as it is today. I'm not going into the politics of it. Raj is here to comment on the politics of it. But economically, if you look at the Indian economy, even when the oil is at $90 per barrel, you are still talking about a growth of 6.5%. Even when the monsoons haven't done well, there is an El Nino effect, you are not really worried about inflation going up in double digits. Now, we belong to an era where we are used to a double-digit inflation. Today, inflation touching 6% causes concern and brings about policy steps, initiatives from both from the government as well as from the RBI to stoke it down. Probably, if you look at the whole world, economically, we have never been so stable as before. So therefore, my hope and my sense is that there may be global uncertainties, there may be global ups and downs, but given India's resilience, ability to withstand this, and as I said, that building the essential muscles of an economy to a level where probably we can face up to these challenges far more resolutely and without much of a turmoil. That's my point number one on the global situation. The local situation, I am not that optimistic. On the local situation, because I think the idea of India needs to be redefined. When I say redefined, I'm not talking about any revolutionary thoughts. What I'm saying is that India is not just in Delhi or in Bombay or in Bangalore. India resides in its 30-odd states and around 5 union territories. And I will tell you how, if you want to secure India's growth, you have to secure the growth and the promise that they will deliver in these states. And that story, even though the aggregate story comes out to 6.5%, but there are two areas of concern I would just touch upon, which is one is that the south of India is growing at a pace and a manner that very soon it might pose a political challenge also. And I will not get into the political challenge, but there is an economic challenge already building. And I think we need to worry about it if we want to sustain this growth momentum. Why? If you take the divide, I will just give you, if you take the average per capita income, Raj talked about per capita income, the average per capita income in the southern states is almost 2.5 lakh or close to 3 lakh in many of the states. But if you look at the north of India, the per capita income Bihar is 50,000. Per capita income in Madhya Pradesh is little more than 70,000. Now, so this kind of economic disparities, and I'm not even going into another yardstick of looking at judging how things are doing by tax collections numbers, which are real numbers. You cannot say that those numbers are not cooked up because they are real money coming in. If you see, there are just 7 states which account for 80% of the government of India's direct taxes revenue. Now, what does it tell you? It doesn't tell you about a country that is growing as equitably and as balanced a manner that a sustainable growth story can be created in the next 20, 30 years. So my point is global challenges. I think the basic muscles, the sinews of Indian economy are strong, but domestically, we need to worry about the manner in which the inequitable, unbalanced growth that is happening among states. So therefore, we need to have stronger states. Why? And I will end there, is because that if you look at governments, I mean, this is not unknown, but I think it's necessary to reiterate that point, that before COVID, the difference was huge. But even after COVID, when the union government started spending more money, the states combined, they spend 15% more that union government does. So, and if you look at expenditure on the capital side, the center's total capital expenditure is little less than what the states do. And yet, the benefits that you think you should get from an equitable and a balanced growth across the country is not happening. You still have islands of prosperity. So I would say that if you want to achieve growth, economic growth, India becoming a developed country by 2047, or even by 2030 to be 5 trillion, and 2027 is a reasonable target to have, to be a $5 trillion economy. I think we need to worry about what is really happening to our states, to our state capitals, and the state administration, manner in which states are governed. There's far too much focus, including, I plead guilty on that, on what is happening in New Delhi or North Block or South Block. I think the media, even the public relations community must focus far more on what is happening to those regions in Northeast and the West and the South. And that will ensure a more balanced growth for India, and meeting that challenge will be probably less stressful. Thank you.
Thank you, AKB. Raj, that brings me to a question. So AKB spoke about South of India, he spoke about equitable growth. Equitable growth possibly is also a political challenge, in the sense that, the politics in North and South are different. The way things are at the moment, they're likely to remain different for some time. So how does it all fall into place?
Fortunately, it's not. I think AKB has touched on a very important point, because what we're going to see in the next couple of years, particularly when delimitation comes up and the constituencies are going to be redefined, and if you go by population as the index for defining the constituencies, then the South is going to be at a great disadvantage, because it has done extremely well in terms of controlling its population. In fact, apart from Kerala, Tamil Nadu is down to zero population growth, Karnataka is heading there, and maybe Andhra and Telangana would soon be there. But which means that when it comes to political representation, they would have less number of MPs coming into the government, into the Lok Sabha. And they've calculated that I think Tamil Nadu loses about 8 of the MPs, whereas a state like Uttar Pradesh, which really hasn't done well in any of the indicators, development indicators, will add from its current 80, go up to 123 or something. I mean, these are some estimates, may not be accurate. So where are we rewarding and who are we rewarding in terms of how we see excellence? The second aspect is in terms, as AKB had pointed out, resources. The fact is that, as he said, close to 60 to 70% of these come from the South. And when it comes to allocation of resources, the South is then paying for North development, and while North can be slack in others. So you are going to get a huge blowback in the next 2-3 years unless you are able to sort out. Already, I think the state finance ministers have got together and have been, southern state finance ministers have got together and have been saying this is unfair, the way, we are sharing our income and expenses. That's there. So I think this is a politically very touchy subject, which will explode in a couple of years if we don't handle it properly. That's the first proposition. In terms of, spreading, I do share the optimism about the economy, but I think the larger point that we need to do, even as politicians, and one of the areas that we need to tackle is, yes, Southern excellence and its conflict with the North will be a problem. The other issue is just feeding ourselves. The fact is that, we are self-sufficient. We believe, we've correctly lauded M.S. Swaminathan for bringing the Green Revolution. We have attained a degree of self-sufficiency in food, particularly grain. But where are we lacking? And why aren't we doing things that are politically, may not seem, doable as we saw with the Farmers' Law when they passed it without the consent of a lot of the groups. There was a revolt, and the Modi government, however strong it was, had to withdraw those laws. But the reality is that if you look at, we may be self-sufficient in rice, exporting it, wheat as well, but when we come to pulses and oils, we are lagging. We import 60% of our, both our pulses and our oil, the dals that we eat, the cooking oils that we do. Why is that we grow in excess so much of rice and wheat, and how can we diversify, and how can we become not just pulses and oils, but a horticulture, that's fruits and vegetables, superpower. We have the climate, we have all the conditions. What are the political decisions that need to be taken to bring that shift? If it is currently, why do people stay? There's a logic to that why people want to stay with rice and wheat. You're paying for the entire thing. The minimum, as they've recently announced, the MSP has also been increased. Is that they are comfortable there. There is no risk in that business. So they get at least whatever they produce. Now you have to say how you can farm out. They have MSPs for other places, but they're really not viable or not being, for some reason, the farmers don't want to do it. So I think quickly to say that if you studied the Green Revolution, what did they do at that point? Why did Green Revolution succeed? Because I happen to be editor-in-chief of the Tribune. And so I was looking at Punjab, and two or three things happened at that time, which we need to recollect how they did things. They coincided all the things that were there, whether it was hybrid seeds, which they got. It was just not hybrid seeds that made the difference. You got the fertilizers, and you brought them cheap into the farms. Then you had water. Bakranangal Dam came up, and you had enough water resources. And then you said, we'll give you a market. So you brought all of this together, and then you slowly introduced it. You got farmers, there were tremendous amount of, since we are in a communications forum, one of the key reasons the revolution happened in the 60s and 70s was there was tremendous communication going on. So there would be actually agriculture information officers that would go and demonstrate to the farmers, how would you do these kind of things? Once they're convinced, they saw the crops, then it became caught like wildfire. So I think that's a very important component which we didn't do in our current second phase of the, if you wanted to call it Green Revolution 2.0. We have not done the things to lay the foundation and enable the farmer to transform it. So I would say, these are two critical issues. We can talk of others.
Globally, from a global economic point of view, we seem to be in a more comfortable place, you said. But we still live in a very uncertain world. You think we are better prepared for uncertainties just because we have, a bigger play with our foreign exchange reserves and, a better shape of the economy? I mean, if tomorrow there is a war in Asia, along with the war in Europe and along with the war that probably will break out in the Middle East, are we well prepared to manage any scenario that we might be confronted with?
What I said was that we are more stable. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't need to prepare. Our basic reserves are reserves in terms of the economic structure, in my view, are pretty strong, relatively speaking. We in a COVID situation, we contracted by around 7%. And the last time we contracted was in 1979-80, when inflation was high, oil prices had their second oil shock came, and our contraction was 5.5%. Now, imagine a global crisis like COVID comes, and we keep it at 7.5%. And those era, even if you look at the 1980s, 5.5% growth, 1990s, 6.5% growth, 2000 noughties, 6.4% growth, and even in the 2010s, if you take out the COVID years, so you should for to make it normalize, we are have grown at around 6.2%. So my sense is that without doing much, we are notching up a growth rate which is an envy of many other countries. Yes, of course, our ideal growth rate should be 8 plus. So to answer your question, that global uncertainties, another war, certainly will impact us, certainly, and particularly when we have a problem with our trade issues, you know. The problem with our trade is right now on two fronts, because unless we grow our trade, unless we grow our manufacturing, I don't think we can just survive by services. And the irony is that it is because of our success of services that our goods performance and manufacturing performance has been affected to some extent. I mean, there is an issue about how you want to bring down tariffs, how do you want to make the process of doing business in India better and easier. There are factor market reforms, essentially land, labor, and capital. Those reforms need to be undertaken. But I think the challenge does not lie so much outside as it is inside. That was the point I was making. Is of course, we need to be prepared. We need to build our reserves, which is around $588 billion, which is, I mean, nothing compared to what we used to be, $1 billion in 1991. Even on oil, look at the recent Ukraine-Russia crisis. I think the way we managed our oil market thing by using the Russian Ural and kept our total overall bill down is something that shows an inherent strength of the Indian economy. So I am not that worried about the global situation. This will obviously have an impact, but the real bigger worry is what is happening inside the country, policy reform, how our services growth increase, huge services growth increase, the global capability centers. We now have a 40% share in the global capability centers in the world. Now that unfortunately gives us so much of foreign exchange that the Reserve Bank of India has to buy those foreign exchange to keep the foreign exchange rate, keep the rupee not that strong. And if it does not buy those dollars, the rupee will get even stronger. And who will be hurt most? It will be our manufacturing sector. Their exports will be hurt the most. So I think we are in a bit of a catch-22 situation where our services success has actually undermined our manufacturing sector trade. So therefore, we need to think hard and think a little imaginatively on what we need to do to make our domestic economy more competitive. And one more point I would like to add here is that how you make the domestic economy. We are a greatly service-oriented economy, but I don't think we are paying enough attention to services quality. And I suspect I will make a controversial statement. I suspect that as a society, we haven't really graduated from the pre-industrial stage, where even as simple a system of work from home can work in the US economy, but work from home in India is fraught with many challenges for managers. I'll end there.
Raj, one question. The general view is that, as economies grow and a nation becomes economically stronger, it is taken far more seriously in the world than otherwise. That's the general tenet of the discussion. Is India being taken seriously because of its economic growth, or there are other reasons?
No, I'm smiling because I've done a book on India's nuclear bomb and why a nation that, built itself on or founded itself on non-violence, built the most violent weapon, the most destructive weapon that humankind ever knows. And one of the things that Ian Huxer, who was that time principal secretary or principal advisor to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, said, and he quoted a historian, Lawrence Namier, who said that those who do not have military strength, their issues will be tended to, I'm paraphrasing, will be treated as quibbles, and therefore justified the building of the bomb. Till that time, she was ambivalent and said, why should we build it and things like that. I think military power, economic power, these are things that make people listen to. Are we, for instance, we have to ask ourselves, really players in the Middle East? Are we, being consulted about the war? In Russia, yes, because we had relations about it. So how do we expand our sphere of influence to ensure that? But I would actually come to a more sort of, I see AKB is very optimistic, and then of course came down with a few realities. But at the end of the day, all these things that we achieve, right? We can have, we are up in the nuclear world status. We are now one of the handful of 7 or 8 people that can make the bomb and therefore defend ourselves. I'm not, for or against the bomb. I look at it in terms of state. Everybody has to be against the bomb, obviously. Okay, you don't want 1 million people, 100, 200,000 people killed, over, innocent civilians being killed. But therefore, the building of the bomb has a certain strategic interest. We can do tactically things, but at the end of the day, the reason, and Dr. Kalam put it very simply, that before we had technology, we lost our technology as we saw it, we became colonized. So by building the bomb, and he was one of the guys that actually built vehicles of peace earlier in the space program, became a missile man, said that he, in many senses, was ensuring peace for the country because China, for instance, which has the nuclear bomb, or Pakistan, which has a bomb, will think twice for attacking India. So there are certain imperatives, and economic imperative is as critical as that. Unless you have the buying power, the purchasing power, people don't listen to you. We've seen it in our lives here itself, in terms of the pecking order, let's say. I think the larger issue that we need to look at is, what is it that, this is all fine to set goals, 2047. End of the day, I think we're all human beings and we want to live better. Our children to be educated better, to have a better house, to transport, have ease of transport, to live a life that is not, in some senses, a drudge, where you are, struggling to make ends meet. And I think millions and millions of people are still doing that, whatever pace of economic growth that AKB has talked about. We really, and I think this is, I would call the biggest crisis is the data crisis that we face. We pride ourselves to have this huge sort of network of, software, computers, the best IT professionals that's there. Please find out whether we can get the right GDP numbers. You will see a huge debate that has broken out as to what should be our, one side saying it's 6%, others saying no, it's 4%. Ask for the real, how do you calculate inflation? What are the prices that you're taking in? What are the factors? We have a real-time network when we had COVID. Why aren't we getting the actual prices that is happening? Why aren't we using, do we have a census 2021? The last time we counted our people was 2011. Tell me any company which is on the growth path, which you'll all work with, can do without having numbers. Hope is not a strategy. You work your strategy based on facts, hard facts, and what is happening around you. And if you're not able to keep in touch with that reality, as he was saying, AKB was saying, there are, as I said, many microverses, and one of the microverses, and maybe that's the metaverse, is this large population that is virtually like them. Earlier we used to say India versus Bharat, but that is not very politically correct. Now everything is Bharat. But that whole rural section that existed, that actually drive India, how much of that has really felt the upliftment that we as middle class people have felt and found that in our own generations our lives have changed. And I grew up cycling to college, then I had a scooter when I this thing, and very, it took me 20 years to transit to a car. Today, I think our kids transit to a car almost within 3-4 years. That kind of prosperity have we brought to them. I think that's if you forget all the benchmarks, I think you have to, why are children going abroad to study? I mean, the best of people, you ask them, where are they studying? They're in some place and they're working elsewhere. So the return, the exodus is happening. We reported that as a cover story. How do you bring them back? How do we get our best brains to say India is the place? And that place, I think, is very critically in all these areas that we talk about. I think he mentioned these federal structure that we have. Where are we looking at the opportunities for them apart from us? And a government, when we talk of politics, has to look at those things. And I think the development strategy that we do is, what are we doing to give them jobs, houses, everything else? I think the government is doing a good job. I'm not saying that Mr. Modi's government is not. In fact, they've probably done a lot more on water than has been done for a long time. A lot more on sanitation, of course, sanitation, an outstanding success. So wherever the government, what I call the, treads the straight and narrow path of development, it will do well. Wherever it starts deviating and trying to divide or create politics of various kinds, we will do badly.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to open up the question floor. Ravi?
Excellent session, as always, very candid, Raj and AKB, on the challenges and opportunities. I just want to pick on AKB's comment, and which is a very serious one, and which also was incidentally my PhD thesis on distribution of powers between the center and the states. We've been through this, AKB, we have had Rajamannar Committee, we had Sarkaria Commission, and we have had many other administrative reforms commission and all of that. So can you please elaborate on the way forward for this particular issue, which is very, very important and which has been there for a long time? And also the fact that earlier those times, there used to be secessionist tendencies of the southern states especially. So do you foresee that it becomes that big a problem? Or India has traveled and is well versed in tackling this problem. So what do you think is the way out? Thank you.
AKB, you want to start and then?
No, I will start from the very explosive point that you made about secession. But before that, let me qualify an impression that I may have created. I think I'm saying that we are a far more stable, economically stable country. That doesn't mean that we don't have challenges, So, I mean, yes, as Raj rightly pointed out, I am sounding optimistic, but I am not at all discounting the mountainous challenges that we have. So that, I think, clarification should be made. I am not saying that this South versus the rest will lead to an economic secession of sorts. I'll tell you a simple reason is that from an economic standpoint, South derives its economic strengths from the rest of the country, not just by way of markets, but also by way of the last 10 years at least, by way of labor forces. Now, if you go to the Foxconn factory in South, you will realize the workers who are coming there, they are not from South. They're coming from Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Odisha. If you go to Kerala, you will realize that the number of people who are working there, because the locals are just not available. So I think that integration is happening in a certain way that South will never find economically that idea very attractive, because there are advantages of being in a larger market. So that's number one. Number two is that the delimitation exercise that Raj very correctly pointed out will be a big issue, and how the South responds to that challenge, because the constitutional thing is very clear. It said that Vajpayee government stopped the delimitation, said that we will do it only after the census of 2026. We don't have a census in 2021. So we cannot have in 2026 the delimitation exercise. So which is why the census that may happen in 2027 will probably expedite it, or it will be delayed by 2031. So my sense is that the South versus the North or the South versus the rest, that debate, its political manifestations will depend on at what point is the next census takes place. If it takes place after the election, immediately after the next elections, well, it is getting closer. We need to be worried. In any case, 2031 is the maximum time we have. Final point, I would say, is that we have a reasonably working arrangement through the GST Council. 2014 saw the demise of the Planning Commission, which used to have some sort of an arrangement by which the states got a voice of some sorts at the central level. Now, I don't think there is any body. The NDC has not met, doesn't there. Interstate Council, I don't know when is the last time we met. I checked, the last time I checked was 2013. Now, Interstate Council is not meeting. NDC does not exist. The only body where you see that the GST Council is the body where you see state voices getting heard. Now, probably we need to create, a body like this. The last Finance Commission report did recommend such a body, which is a permanent body of fiscal council. And I think maybe the scope of that council could be expanded, and the states' voices should be included there, and that is the way forward. Last point, sorry Rahul, I'm taking too long, is already the center has done something very interesting, and all of you must know that almost around 15% of the total center's capital expenditure goes to the states, and it is linked to the states committing themselves to certain reforms. Now, I think such linked assistance is a good idea, because conditionality, after all, you may not like it, but it's a good idea to bring about states on board. But a permanent body of a kind of a GST council, which takes care of many of the social sectors like health, education, water. Raj talked about data. I think data is a very important point. I would add to that water. Nobody is worried about water in this country. Not just the architects. Architects don't worry about where will the water flow. So you see the floods there. Bangalore was flooded because the architects most probably did not worry about where will the water flow. Every locality in Delhi, there is no drainage system. So if there is a heavy rain, the roads are flooded. So I think water management is also a very critical area. So I would say that that's the way forward. Thank you.
Raj, yeah.
I think it's a very important question when you talked of secession. And there has been, if you know history a bit, which you do, I'm sure, is in the 60s, the entire Tamil Nadu movement to secede from India because of the language issue, the imposition of Hindi. That threat is a reality, and we have to look at it. But I think there's also a more pragmatic approach, and I think that in many senses, it's good to ask this question because it comes to the core of what is India. Why, as a nation, what is this idea of India, and why do we bandy together? What are the benefits that we have that make us stay with India? Someone think that we are born, like our caste or family name, that we're born into India, therefore we should be India. But I think it's good to ask every day, just as we ask ourselves, where are you headed to? How are you going? What you're doing? Is this the right way to do? As a nation, where are we going? And how does a nation help us? That question became very acute in Punjab, which wanted secession. We actually had, and in Jammu and Kashmir, where we have live cases. Why just ask the South? You have in the North two big states that have advocated secessionism. And as we've seen our recent battle with Canada on the Khalistan issue and the fact that they were harboring our terrorists. So what is the factors that will determine why this country would unite? I think that's a thing that we need to keep asking ourselves. Is it economic? Maybe in Punjab's case, they realized very quickly that who buys the wheat? If without India, would there be a market for its wheat? But Punjab had surplus wheat and rice. Which country will buy wheat, the kind of quantities that we have, and give them the prosperity they initially got? Now, of course, Punjab's a different story. The same thing with Tamil Nadu. What are the practical things of maintaining an army? Supposing you do secede from India, who buys your goods? who maintains your border, your territorial border? You'll have to spend a hell of a lot of more money to maintain your armies and everything else. So it's not an easy question when you say, let's secede and become an independent country, as we've seen in Europe, where the fractions have continued to have war with each other and continue to have major issues that are there. So I think it's very important for all of us to keep asking this question, what keeps us within India? Is it the unity as a single mono kind of entity that we want to build as a culture, or because we enjoy our diversity, our languages, our cuisines, is that the greatness of India? What are we trying to achieve? And that question we must keep answering if we have to remain united and have to prosper. So secessionists should be asked, it's the devil, but you need to confront the devil and find out why, and make sure, therefore, every day that you live in India, that you really enjoy being, and you know why you are in India.
Thank you. I think there's lots to chew upon and think about, Thank you.
Yeah, so on behalf of PAFI, I would like to thank our esteemed panelists. I think it's very important that we had this very optimistic view of India being economically stable economy, and I think there's a lot of comfort in that, we being resilient. But there are a few things which were pointed out, like defining issues and benchmarking to where we want to be. I think it's very important to be, if we are looking at being a developed economy by 2030, 47, that has to be very well defined. Laying foundation and communicating to masses is also a key. So whenever we know that major shift needs to happen, it has to be communicated. Rewarding excellence, be it public or states or a private sector. Then last thing, the permanent body or a fiscal council to be formed, which takes care of the state's voices and especially for the social sector. I think these are some of the important key takeaways. And thanks everyone